Mrs. Eleanor was in the bathtub when I realized the water was ice cold. She had been sitting in it for 40 minutes, smiling, not shivering, not reacting to the temperature at all, just smiling at the bathroom mirror and humming something I had never heard before. I worked as a live-in caregiver for elderly clients. I'd been in the field for 6 years, bathing, feeding, medication management, companionship. I'd cared for dementia patients, stroke survivors, people in hospice. I understood the work, the dignity required, the patience. Mrs. Eleanor was 87. Early-stage Alzheimer's, still mostly functional. Could hold conversations, recognized family, just needed help with daily tasks. Reminders for medications, someone to make sure she ate, someone to prevent falls. I started working for Mrs. Eleanor in September 2021. She lived alone in a large house. Her children visited monthly. They'd hired me to provide care 5 days a week, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Mrs. Eleanor was pleasant, a retired school teacher. She liked crossword puzzles and British crime dramas. She talked about her late husband, her garden, her students from decades ago. Normal, manageable. But there were moments when Mrs. Eleanor would stop mid-sentence, go completely still, stare at nothing, then resume talking as if no time had passed. I recognized this. Cognitive lapses. Common with Alzheimer's. I document them, adjust care accordingly. 3 weeks into the job, I noticed something else. Mrs. Eleanor would sometimes stand in doorways, not moving, not speaking, just standing, facing into the room but not entering. She'd stay like that for several minutes before moving again. I asked her about it once. "Mrs. Eleanor, are you okay? Do you need help with something?" She turned slowly, smiled. "I'm just waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For them to leave." "Who?" Mrs. Eleanor looked back into the room, her bedroom. "The people standing by the bed." I looked. The room was empty. Bed made. No one there. "There's no one in your room, Mrs. Eleanor." Her smile faded. "There are 6 people standing by the bed. They're waiting too." I knew this was a hallucination, common with Alzheimer's. The brain creating images from memory fragments and confusion. I'd been trained for this. And you don't argue with the patient. You redirect. "Would you like to sit in the living room instead?" I asked gently. "We can work on a puzzle." Mrs. Eleanor considered this, then nodded. "Yes, they don't come into the living room. They only stay in the bedroom." I guided her to the living room. We did a crossword. Mrs. Eleanor seemed normal. The incident passed. But it happened again the next day, and the day after. Mrs. Eleanor would stand in the bedroom doorway, staring at the empty room, waiting for them to leave. I documented everything, spoke with Mrs. Eleanor's daughter. The daughter scheduled a neurologist appointment. They adjusted medications. The hallucinations should decrease. Instead, they spread. Mrs. Eleanor started seeing them in other rooms. The kitchen, the bathroom, the hallway. She'd stop walking, stand still, wait for invisible people to move before she'd continue. "How many are there now?" I asked one afternoon, trying to understand the progression. Mrs. Eleanor was standing in the hallway, staring toward the bathroom. 11. They're in the bathroom now. They like the bathroom. They stand around the tub. What do they do there? They wait for someone to get in. I felt a chill she couldn't explain. Mrs. Eleanor spoke so factly, like she was describing actual people with actual behaviors. "And then what happens?" I asked. "I don't know. I never get in when they're there." But on this particular Tuesday, Mrs. Eleanor did get in. I had been preparing lunch in the kitchen. Mrs. Eleanor had said she wanted to bathe before eating. She was capable of bathing herself with minimal supervision. I checked on her every 10 minutes. Standard protocol. I knocked on the bathroom door at 11:35. "Mrs. Eleanor, are you okay in there?" "Yes, dear. The water's lovely." I continued preparing lunch. At 11:45, I checked again. "Mrs. Eleanor?" "Still lovely, dear." At 11:55, I checked a third time. "You've been in there 20 minutes. That's long enough. Let's get you dried off." No response. I knocked harder. "Mrs. Eleanor?" Nothing. I opened the door. Mrs. Eleanor was sitting in the bathtub, water up to her chest. Her hands rested on the sides of the tub. She was facing the mirror, smiling. "Mrs. Eleanor, time to get out." The woman didn't respond, didn't move, just kept smiling at the mirror. I approached, touched the woman's shoulder gently. "Mrs. Eleanor?" Mrs. Eleanor's head turned slowly. Her smile didn't change. Her eyes were unfocused, looking through me rather than at me. "They're here," she said softly. "All of them. They're in the water with me." I looked at the bathtub. Mrs. Eleanor was alone, but something made me touch the water. It was ice cold. The bathtub held 40 gallons. I had filled it 30 minutes ago. She'd tested the temperature. It had been warm, comfortable, perfect for bathing. Now it was cold, not lukewarm, not cooling naturally, cold, like it had been sitting for hours. "Mrs. Eleanor, this water is freezing. How long have you been sitting in this?" "Since you filled it, dear. It's too cold. You need to get out, right now." I grabbed a towel, reached to help Mrs. Eleanor stand, but she resisted. Her frail arms had surprising strength. "Not yet," Mrs. Eleanor said. "They're not finished." "Who's not finished?" "The ones in the water. They're still settling." I looked at the bathtub again. The water was perfectly still. No movement, no ripples. Just cold, flat water reflecting the bathroom light. And then I saw it. In the reflection on the water's surface, shadows, multiple shadows, like people standing around the tub. But when I looked up, the bathroom was empty, except for Mrs. Eleanor. The shadows were only visible in the water's reflection, dark shapes surrounding the tub, still, silent. I pulled harder. "Mrs. Eleanor, get out of the tub now." This time Mrs. Eleanor let herself be lifted. I pulled her out, wrapped her in towels. She was shaking violently. Her skin was blue-tinged, hypothermic. She'd been sitting in freezing water for at least 30 minutes. Mrs. Eleanor was taken to the hospital, treated for mild hypothermia, evaluated by a neurologist. The hallucinations were getting worse. They adjusted medications again, recommended increased supervision. But here's what I couldn't explain: the water temperature. I had filled that tub, tested it with a thermometer. Hospital protocol for elderly bathing. 98 degrees Fahrenheit. Comfortable. Safe. At 11:55, 50 minutes later, I tested it again before helping Mrs. Eleanor. 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough to cause hypothermia in minutes. Cold enough that no one could comfortably sit in it. But Mrs. Eleanor had sat in it for at least 30 minutes, smiling, humming, showing no distress, no shivering, no reaction to the cold. I checked the water heater, functioning normally. I ran the tub again, tested the temperature, normal. The water stayed warm, cooled gradually over time as it should. I couldn't explain how that water had become so cold so quickly, or why Mrs. Eleanor hadn't reacted to it. I reported everything to Mrs. Eleanor's family. They increased my hours, added overnight care, more supervision, more support. But 3 days later, I arrived for my shift at 8 a.m. and found Mrs. Eleanor in the bathtub again. fully clothed, sitting in an empty tub, no water, just sitting there, facing the mirror, smiling. "Mrs. Eleanor, what are you doing?" She didn't respond. I approached, touched her shoulder. "Mrs. Eleanor?" Her head turned. Her smile remained. "They asked me to wait here. They're filling it now. There's no water in the tub." "Not yet, but they're bringing it. They're carrying it up from the basement. It takes time. So many stairs. But they're almost here." I felt the bottom of the tub, completely dry. I checked the faucet. Off. No water running. No water anywhere. "Mrs. Eleanor, there's no one bringing water. The tub is empty. Let's get you out." I helped her stand, guided her out of the bathroom, sat her in the living room, made tea. Mrs. Eleanor seemed confused, couldn't remember getting in the tub, couldn't explain what she'd meant about people bringing water. I checked the bathroom again. The tub was still dry, but on the floor around it were wet footprints. Small puddles, shaped like bare feet, multiple sets, leading from the bathroom door to the tub, as if several people with wet feet had walked to the tub, then disappeared. I checked the basement. No water, no leaks, no explanation for wet footprints in a house where I was the only one besides Mrs. Eleanor. I photographed the footprints, documented everything, told Mrs. Eleanor's family. They scheduled an emergency psychiatric evaluation. The doctors diagnosed worsening Alzheimer's with psychotic features, hallucinations, delusions. They recommended specialized memory care, a facility where Mrs. Eleanor could be monitored constantly. Mrs. Eleanor was moved to a memory care facility the following week. My services were no longer needed. The family thanked me, paid me generously, said I'd done everything right. But before I left, I asked Mrs. Eleanor's daughter a question. "Did your mother ever mention anything about the house? Any history? Any incidents?" The daughter hesitated. "Like what?" "Anything involving water. The bathroom. The bathtub." The daughter's face changed. "How did you know?" "Know what?" "My father died in that house. In the bathroom. He had a heart attack while bathing. My mother found him. He'd been in the water for, they estimated, about 40 minutes. She tried to call 911, but she was so shocked she couldn't speak. She just stood there, looking at him in the tub." I felt cold. "When did this happen?" 15 years ago. November. "Why?" "November. The same month as the bathroom incidents. 40 minutes. The same amount of time Mrs. Eleanor had sat in the ice-cold water." "Did your mother ever talk about seeing things after that? Seeing your father?" "She said she saw him sometimes. In the bedroom. In the hallway. She said he was waiting. That's all she'd say. Waiting. We thought it was grief. Normal processing. It faded after a few years. Until the Alzheimer's started." I never went back to that house. But I still thinks about those wet footprints, 11 of them, leading to a dry bathtub where Mrs. Eleanor sat fully clothed, smiling, waiting for people to fill the tub with water they were carrying up from the basement. Water that somehow made a full bathtub ice cold in minutes. Water that Mrs. Eleanor sat in for 30 minutes without shivering, without reacting. Just smiling at a reflection that showed shadows of people who weren't there. I work with different clients now, different houses, but I never help patients bathe without checking the water temperature twice, and I never leaves them alone in the bathroom for more than 5 minutes. Because I know what I saw, the footprints, the shadows in the water, the temperature that defied physics. And I know Mrs. Eleanor saw something too, something she called them, something that waited in the bathroom, around the tub, something that asked her to wait while they brought water up from the basement. The doctors called it hallucination, psychosis, Alzheimer's creating images from grief and confusion. But I measured that water, 42 degrees, in a bathroom that was 72 degrees, in a tub that had been 98 degrees 50 minutes earlier. That's not hallucination. That's not psychosis. That's something else. Something that made water cold. Something that left wet footprints. Something that waited in a bathroom for 15 years until the widow who found her husband's body started forgetting what was real and what wasn't. Or maybe started remembering something she'd suppressed. Something she saw that day in November when she found him in the tub. Something that made her stand there for 40 minutes before she could call for help. Something she never talked about until the Alzheimer's made her forget how to keep secrets. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. Elderly care work often means entering someone's private space, their home, their history, their memories. And sometimes you realize the person you're caring for is trying to tell you something, trying to warn you about something that happened in that house long before you arrived. Something they can't quite articulate anymore, but they remember. Somewhere deep in their failing minds, they remember. Rachel worked as a certified nursing assistant for a home care agency. She specialized in patients with advanced dementia, people who couldn't live independently, needed constant supervision, help with every basic task. In December 2022, Rachel was assigned to Mr. Harold, 91 years old, late-stage Alzheimer's, required 24-hour care. The family hired Rachel for the night shift, 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. Her job was medication management, preventing wandering, responding to needs, keeping him safe through the night. Mr. Harold lived with his son, Daniel, and Daniel's wife, Patricia. They cared for him during the day. Rachel took over at night so the family could sleep. Standard arrangement. The house was in the countryside, old farmhouse, 3 bedrooms upstairs, living areas downstairs. Mr. Harold's bedroom was on the first floor, converted dining room, hospital bed, medical equipment, everything he needed within reach. Rachel started the job on a Monday. Daniel showed her around, explained his father's routine, medications at 10 p.m., 2 a.m., and 6 a.m. Check his position every hour to prevent bed sores. Change him if needed. Call if any problems. He sleeps pretty well, Daniel said. The 2 a.m. meds knock him out. You shouldn't have much trouble. Rachel reviewed the medication list. Standard dementia medications, sleep aids, pain management. Nothing unusual. Her first night was quiet. Mr. Harold slept through most of it. She gave him his medications on schedule, checked on him hourly, documented everything in the care log. Easy shift. The second night was the same. Quiet. Routine. Mr. Harold woke briefly for his 2 a.m. medication, took his pills, went back to sleep immediately. Rachel sat in the kitchen between checks. Read a book. Monitored the baby monitor they kept in his room so she could hear if he stirred. On the third night, Rachel gave Mr. Harold his 10 p.m. medication. He swallowed the pills, drank water, laid back on the pillow. Then his eyes opened wide. He grabbed Rachel's wrist with surprising strength. "Don't give me the 2 a.m., he said clearly. Rachel was startled. Mr. Harold rarely spoke coherently. Most of his words were confused, fragmented. This was a full sentence, direct, urgent. "Mr. Harold, you need your 2 a.m. medication. It's on your schedule. Your son wants me to give it to you." "No." His grip tightened. "Don't give me the 2 a.m., please. I need to stay awake. I need to see what they do." "What who does?" "The ones who come in at 2:30. No one comes in at 2:30. The house is locked. Your family is sleeping. It's just you and me. They're not family. They come in through the basement. They walk up the stairs. They stand around my bed. They wait for me to be asleep. But if I'm awake, they leave. If I see them, they leave. Rachel knew this was dementia, confusion, paranoia, common in late-stage Alzheimer's. She spoke gently. "Mr. Harold, no one's coming into the house. You're safe. The medication helps you sleep. It's important for your health." He released her wrist. His eyes lost focus. The moment of clarity passed. He murmured something incoherent and closed his eyes. Rachel documented the interaction, noted the unusual lucidity, the paranoid delusion about people coming through the basement. She'd mention it to Daniel in the morning. At 2 a.m., Rachel gave Mr. Harold his scheduled medication. He swallowed it automatically, already mostly asleep. Within 5 minutes, he was deeply unconscious. The medication worked quickly. Rachel returned to the kitchen, continued reading her book. At 2:30, she heard something on the baby monitor. A creak, footsteps maybe. Old houses settle. She listened. Nothing more. At 3 a.m., she checked on Mr. Harold. He was sleeping normally, breathing steady. She adjusted his blanket, returned to the kitchen. The next morning, she mentioned Mr. Harold's comment to Daniel. "He seemed worried about someone coming into the house at 2:30. Has he said that before?" Daniel sighed. "He's been saying things like that for months. Seeing people who aren't there. Thinking strangers are in the house. It's the disease. His brain is creating these scenarios. Don't worry about it." Rachel accepted that. But that night, when she gave Mr. Harold his 10 p.m. medication, he grabbed her wrist again. "I asked you not to give me the 2 a.m. Mr. Harold, I have to give you the 2 a.m. It's your prescribed medication. Then stay in the room with me. After 2 a.m., stay until 3 a.m. Just sit with me, please." Why? Because they come at 2:30. And if you're in the room, awake, they won't come in. They only come when I'm alone, when I'm sleeping, when no one can see them. "Mr. Harold, there's no one coming into this house." He looked directly at her. His eyes were clear. "Present, then prove it. Stay in the room. You'll see I'm right. Or you'll see I'm wrong. Either way, you'll know." Rachel considered. It wasn't against protocol. She could sit with him if it gave him comfort, if it helped him feel safe. That was part of her job. "All right," she agreed. "I'll stay in the room tonight after I give you the 2 a.m. medication. I'll sit right here until 3 a.m. Will that help?" He relaxed. "Yes, that will help. Thank you." At 2 a.m., Rachel gave him his medication. Instead of returning to the kitchen, she sat in the chair beside his bed. She brought her book, set a timer for 3 a.m. She'd sit with him for an hour, give him peace of mind. Mr. Harold fell asleep within minutes, the medication working. Rachel read her book. The house was silent, except for the old furnace cycling on and off. Normal night sounds. At 2:28, Rachel heard something. From below, from the basement. A creak, then another, like footsteps on wooden stairs. Rachel set her book down, listened. The sound continued. Slow footsteps, ascending from the basement, coming up the stairs to the first floor. Rachel stood, moved to the doorway of Mr. Harold's room. The hallway was dark. The stairs from the basement opened into the kitchen, about 20 feet from where Rachel stood. The footsteps stopped. Rachel waited, watching the dark kitchen. No movement, no sound. Then she heard it. Multiple footsteps. Not just one person, several, walking through the kitchen. Slow, measured, coming toward the hallway, toward Mr. Harold's room. Rachel reached for the light switch, turned on the hallway light. The footsteps stopped immediately. Rachel looked down the hallway. Empty. No one there. She walked to the kitchen, turned on that light too. Empty. She checked the basement door. Closed. Locked from the inside. She went to the basement, turned on the light, descended the stairs. Empty. Old furnace. Storage boxes. Concrete floor. No one there. No way in from outside. The basement windows were small, high up, and secured with bars. No access. Rachel returned to Mr. Harold's room. He was still asleep. She checked the time. 2:34 a.m. She sat back down, kept the hallway light on, listened. At 2:47, she heard the footsteps again, from the basement, coming up the stairs, into the kitchen. But this time Rachel didn't get up. She sat in the chair, watching the doorway, waiting to see if anything would appear. The footsteps reached the hallway. Rachel could hear them clearly. Multiple people walking, getting closer to Mr. Harold's room. They stopped right outside the doorway. Rachel could feel presence. Wait. Something was standing just outside the room. Multiple somethings. She couldn't see anything, but she knew they were there. The room felt colder. Rachel's breath fogged slightly. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees in seconds. Mr. Harold stirred in his sleep, murmured something. The presence outside the doorway retreated. The footsteps moved away, back down the hallway, into the kitchen, down the basement stairs. Then silence. The temperature returned to normal. Rachel checked her timer. 2:52 a.m. 8 minutes until 3 a.m. She sat motionless, listening, watching. Nothing else happened. At 3 a.m., her timer beeped. She turned it off, stood, checked Mr. Harold, still sleeping soundly. She stepped into the hallway, turned off the light, returned to the kitchen, sat down, tried to process what she'd heard. Footsteps, multiple people, walking through a locked house, coming from a locked basement, stopping outside a patient's room, leaving when he stirred. Rachel didn't mention it to Daniel that morning. What would she say? I heard footsteps? In an old house? Houses make noises? She'd sound paranoid, unprofessional. But that night, when Mr. Harold grabbed her wrist at 10 p.m., he said, "You heard them last night. I could tell. You stayed awake. They knew. They left before 3 a.m. because you were there, awake." Mr. Harold, I heard the house settling. Old houses make sounds. Did the sounds stop when you turned on the lights? Rachel paused. They had. The footsteps had stopped the moment she turned on the hallway light, and again when she stood up and stayed visible in the doorway. You need to tell Daniel, Mr. Harold said. This house, something's wrong with it. Has been for years. They come every night at 2:30. I used to be awake for it. Before the medication, I'd see them in the hallway, dark shapes. They'd stand in the doorway, looking at me. If I moved, they'd leave. If I stayed still, they'd come closer. Mr. Harold, that's not possible. Then explain why you heard them. You're not sick. You don't have dementia. You heard what I've been hearing for 3 years. Tell Daniel, please. Rachel spoke with Daniel that morning. She told him about the footsteps, the sounds from the basement. She tried to be clinical, objective, not emotional. Daniel listened. His expression was guarded. Did you see anything? No, just heard sounds. Old houses make sounds, Rachel, especially old farmhouses. Settling, pipes, rodents. My father's dementia makes him interpret normal sounds as threats. That doesn't mean something's actually there. The sounds stopped when I turned on lights, because you stopped hearing them once you were focused on something else. Your brain filtered them out. That's normal. Rachel wanted to believe that, but she knew what she'd heard. Multiple footsteps, ascending from the basement, walking through the house, stopping outside Mr. Harold's door. Has your father always talked about people coming into the house at 2:30? Rachel asked. Daniel hesitated. Yes, since we moved him to this house, since my mother died 3 years ago. And before that? No, he lived independently until then. Never mentioned seeing or hearing anything unusual. Did something happen in this house? Any history? Daniel's jaw tightened. Why would you ask that? Just trying to understand why your father is so specific about 2:30. Why he's so consistent about it. Most dementia hallucinations are random, varied. His are the same every night. Daniel stood. My father's brain is dying. He latches onto patterns, routines. That's all this is. I appreciate you caring for him, but please don't encourage his delusions. Give him his medication on schedule. Don't feed into the paranoia. Rachel continued working. She gave Mr. Harold his 2 a.m. medication every night, sat in the kitchen, documented everything. And every night at 2:30, she heard the footsteps from the basement. She never turned on the lights again. She just listened, documented the exact times, the patterns, the consistency. After 2 weeks, Rachel gave notice, told the agency she was accepting a different position, better hours, better pay. She didn't tell them the real reason. Before she left, Mr. Harold said something during his last 10 p.m. medication. He was barely conscious, the disease progressing rapidly. But he managed to say, "They're waiting. They know I'm almost gone. Once I can't wake up anymore, they'll come all the way in. They'll take what they came for." What did they come for? Rachel asked. Mr. Harold's eyes closed. The same thing they took from my wife. Rachel never found out what he meant. She left that night, never went back. Another nurse took over the position. Lasted 3 weeks before quitting. No explanation. Mr. Harold died in February 2023. In his sleep, between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., Daniel found him at 6 a.m. when he came downstairs to check. The night nurse had given him his 2 a.m. medication. He'd fallen asleep and never woken up. Natural causes. Expected. He was 91 with late-stage Alzheimer's. No autopsy, no investigation. But Daniel sold the house 4 months later, moved to a different state. When Rachel saw the listing online, she read the property description. Historical farmhouse. Original foundation. Basement. She researched the property history. Found something interesting. In 1968, the previous owners had reported break-ins multiple times, always between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Nothing stolen. No signs of forced entry, just evidence that someone had been in the house, walking through rooms. The police never found an explanation. The family moved out. New owners moved in. No reports of break-ins. No issues. Until Daniel moved his father there in 2019, and Mr. Harold started talking about people coming through the basement at 2:30. Rachel still thinks about those footsteps. The consistency. The way they stopped when she was visible. When she turned on lights. When she showed she was awake and aware. Like they needed everyone to be asleep. Unconscious. Unaware. Like they couldn't proceed if someone was watching. Mr. Harold had begged her not to give him the 2 a.m. medication because it made him sleep, made him unconscious, made him unaware. And once he couldn't wake up anymore, couldn't be aware anymore, they came all the way in. Rachel doesn't know what all the way in means. She doesn't know what they took. She doesn't know what they took from his wife. She just knows that an old man with dementia was trying to tell her something, trying to warn her, trying to stay awake because that was the only defense he had against something that came every night at 2:30. Something that walked up from a locked basement, through a locked house, to stand outside the room of a dying man who was the last person who could still see them coming.